All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Wholesaling the Cool Way. I'm your co host, Jasper Cool, here with my dad, Mark. And on this podcast, we both like to share tips and tricks and kind of a weekly update on our respective businesses. We both run wholesaling businesses focused in North Carolina. I'm primarily doing more houses, and my dad's areas of real estate. So typically, we like to start it off with some inspiration over the past week. It could be anything from books to podcasts to YouTube interviews or anything else. So do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, sure. I'm here
All right.
broadcasting from the Tesla because it's freezing here, and my Tesla has a heated seat, and the tiny house is kind of crowded. Um, so yeah, I've got some notes here. I'll just pull up for this. So yeah, this week you're going to hear a lot from me probably in this coming year about strategic coach because I got into strategic coaching program, entrepreneurial coaching program, which is Dan Sullivan's company that coaches entrepreneurs. So I'm super pumped about it, and I've been reading books and going through their resources. So this one of the things I've been reading is a book by Dan Sullivan called The Self-Managing Company, and that's been really great to read. And one of the takeaways I'll share from that I really appreciate is this thing he has called the 4 C's, and it's the idea behind it is everybody wants more confidence, and people don't really always know how to get there. And so he's got 4 C's, and he says that it starts with commitment, which is commitment to a certain goal, a quantified goal, and then the next thing is challenge, which is going through the challenge of getting to the goal, which is like the hero's journey. And then when you go through the challenge of the learning curve, then you get competency. You increase your competency, which is the third C. And then the fourth C is confidence. You gain new confidence from going through the first 3 C's. So I really like that model. And what he was saying is that entrepreneurs who want to grow and scale their business, you're always going to be in that cycle. You're never going to stop if you want to keep growing and scaling. Like some people think, oh, I'm
Mhm.
just going to get confident and competency, and I'm just going to be at a place where I never am challenged anymore. And that if you want to continue to grow and scale, that's never going to be true. You're always going to have the next mountain peak to look at and shoot for, and then you go through the cycle again. So I thought that was a cool model that it's in that book. And then another thing that I like from that I was reading this morning is they have this idea of the biggest check, and it's like the biggest check you've received so far, and then using that as a model for like your competency now is that level because now you have belief in yourself that you can achieve a check that big. He talks about taking an average of your 5 biggest checks over the last year and then making that your biggest check rather than your number one biggest check. But anyway, either way you do it, like if you have your biggest check as like, this is my level of competency now, this is what I know I can do. And then from there you set your minimum check that you'll accept, like the minimum amount of money you're willing to even spend your time taking in, and then you set
Mhm.
what he calls a dream check, like what would feel incredible if I could hit this. So like say for example your biggest check is 20k, right? And then you'd say, well, from this point forward, I don't want to accept anything less than 10k. It's not worth my time, so that's going to be my minimum check. And wow, wouldn't it be amazing if I could get a 100k check, right? And so that's your dream check, your biggest check, and your minimum. So that's a cool little business, little mental model too that I got from
Mhm.
that. I like. And then
Yeah.
staying on the strategic coach thread, um, I've been listening to this 2-part series with it's an interview with Dan Sullivan by this guy, and I don't remember his last name. Sorry, but it's Brendan, and he's an Irish guy, and he's got a company called Simple Scaling, and he has a 2-part interview with Dan Sullivan talking about all this entrepreneurial stuff and lifestyle and mindsets, and it's really great. I did write down a couple of takeaways from that, just simple things. Uh, one of the phrases that is cool that I got from that is simple scales and complex fails. Um, and so it's just about staying with simplicity and staying with what works and not trying to add complexity, which is also in a book that Jasper, you and I both just read by Morgan Housel, called Same as Ever. And he talks about that. He talks about how humans bias toward complexity because we think it makes us look smarter or we think we should be working harder. but actually simplicity is the most effective thing and staying with teams,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So anyway, that dovetails with that idea. And then another thing I wrote down from that podcast was Dan Sullivan said, as an entrepreneur, as a leader of your company, be not in control, but in charge. You know, just making a distinction of, you don't want to be in control. You want to give people power to run their departments and do their thing and be in their unique gifts. But you want to be in charge. And he threw in a funny little sidebar to that, as like, you know, like a cavalry in the army charge, you know, like you're getting your team to charge, you're inspiring them and leading them. And then also, like, if in the model of electricity, you're like putting a charge into something, giving it a jolt, right? Like that's your job as a leader, more than being in control.
Mm-hmm.
I like that paradigm. And I'll just share one last idea that came out of those podcasts, which is this guy, Brendan, who has a podcast. He said he was listening to an interview with, I can't remember this guy's first name, Gupta. You've heard of him, Jasper. And then Naval, on Naval's podcast. And he was saying this idea of savagely constructing the environment with the people you want to become, which is just like really going for continuing to surround yourself with people who inspire you and who you want to be like. And that
Mm-hmm.
sort of dovetails with the idea of, you know, you are the sum total of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah.
And Dan Sullivan even piled on to that and said, or even the 5 best books you've read, or the most recent 5 best books you've read. You know,
Right.
I like those ideas too. So I just want to share that. That's my inspiration and education for the week. That's what I got.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I love the frame you shared about Dan Sullivan, from Dan Sullivan. I like that a lot.
The 4 C's.
Yeah, the 4 C's and the biggest check for whatever that is, a frame or goal setting
Yeah, I
exercise or
think it's a
whatever. I like
frame.
that.
Yeah, it's a frame of like, this is my minimum, this is my competency, or
Yeah.
where my confidence level is at, and I want to grow into my dream. You know, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know in the past I've focused on like increasing my minimum, but I'd never focused on the other two. You know, your biggest deal, make that your new competence level, and then working towards a dream deal size or check size or whatever. So
Yeah.
I like that. I like that tweak. Cool. Well, for me this week, I started Patrick Bet-David's new book. It's called How to Choose Your Enemies Wisely. I've really been enjoying that one
It's a great title.
so far. What's that?
Great title.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been really enjoying that one so far. I've got a lot of takeaways already from it. One of the things that I liked, well, he's recommended a lot of books too, so I've actually already bought like multiple books just from reading his book. But either way, one of the books he talked about was called The Toyota Way. I've never heard of this book before, but I think it was written by a Japanese entrepreneur. And Patrick Bet-David mentioned it because he said that you want to, in business, you want to combine the approach of the Japanese and the Americans, because this is news to me, but Japanese people have, I think, the longest like tenured businesses in all of the world. And he said that the oldest Japanese business began in like the 14 or 1500s, like insane, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years old. And I don't think there's any American company that's anywhere near. We might have some that are still around from like the 1800s, but I don't think there's anywhere near the level. And they have a bunch of those. Like it's not just one in Japan. It's like all these companies just last for generations and generations. And so there's two caveats there, because one is like, look at how they focus on the future. They focus on long term instead of like the quick gain, which sometimes Americans might focus on. But the other kind of caveat to that is part of the reason that their businesses are around so long is because they don't grow as much as we do, you know, in terms of business, just on average. Like Americans, a lot of these businesses like Amazon, Google, they've only been around 20 years and they're these huge, huge companies, right?
Yeah.
In Japan, it's not so much like that. There are some, but mostly they're just growing gradually, gradually, gradually. And so there's two lessons to take from that. Like one, you want to focus on slow, consistent progress, and you want to have a long-term vision, and that's what he mentioned. But two, combining that with the American aspect, which is like execution, fast driving. You want to have a balance of both, where you're not like so much like Silicon Valley, where you're just pushing, 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 and then you go bankrupt. But you're not too much like, oh, I'm just slowly, slowly, and then you just 500 years later, you're only like double the size that you are now. You know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
That was a good kind of paradigm to look at both sides of paradox or whatever. But I also ordered that book, so I'm excited to check that out too. And then I also listened to him on Lewis Howes this week, which is kind of promoting that book that I'm already reading. But I enjoyed listening to him as well, talk about some of the same frameworks. And one of the things that I was inspired by in the interview was that just his like transition into faith, because he actually shared that he started as like an atheist when he was younger because he came from such a tough upbringing and from being from the Middle East, and they were bombing them and stuff, and they had to escape to America and all that stuff. And so his frame was like, well, there's no way there's a God, because he wouldn't let these things happen to me and people that are in my country. He wouldn't let these things happen. And so he was like total atheist, like total on that side. And then he kind of had a shift, and now he's total opposite side. And it was cool to see him talk about that and get emotional too. He got really emotional. One of the questions Lewis asked him, I forget the exact question, but it was something like, if you were to lose everything and your business went south or whatever, and all these bad things happened, but you still had like your God, like how would that make you feel? And he was just like got emotional, but he was like, that's the only thing that I care about, and I would be totally fine. So it was cool. It was cool to see how much faith he has, and it's also cool to see someone like that who's like still very open-minded, and obviously he made a full transition. Like some people might be atheists their whole life, but instead he really went out and researched all the different religions and which one he wanted to go after, and then now he's like a Christian or whatever, and he believes strongly in that. But it was just cool to see kind of him come full circle on that. And then also the choose your enemies thing. He mentioned Tom Brady a lot in the book so far, and I really like that because he mentioned the choose your enemies is kind of like using. You can use like the word haters or whatever. But he used the word enemies. But he was talking about how Tom Brady used different enemies throughout each stage of his career. And when he first came into the league, everyone knows he was drafted like very low, and there were 6 quarterbacks that were ahead of him. And so he said that those were his enemies when he got drafted. He was like, I'm gonna make these guys, or not the quarterbacks themselves, but like the teams, I'm gonna make them regret not choosing me before one of these other guys. And obviously he did. And he showed this fun graphic in the book where it was like Tom Brady's stats and those guys combined stats. And their combined starts, so just games that they started in, was like half of Tom Brady's wins combined of 6 guys. And I think
Amazing.
maybe they had 1 ring combined or something, but Tom might have 7. And so it was just like not even close. But really cool to see that. But then he shared like that was enough to get him, I think, to like his first 3 or 4 Super Bowls. But then the Patriots drafted a new quarterback that was supposed to replace him because he was getting older. And so that became his new enemy, right? He was like, I'm not going to let this guy take my spot. And then he won like 2 more rings. And so that became his new enemy. And then after he won those 2 more rings, everyone was like, man, Tom Brady's the best, all this stuff, but he's washed, he's done now. And then he was like, okay, that's my new enemy. Like they say, I can't do it because he was super old. He was like 39 or something. And he was like, well, I'm going to do it. And so he went to a new team just to prove that it wasn't like Bill Belichick. It wasn't the Patriots. It was him. So he went to a new team, won another Super Bowl, and then, he went out. But it was just cool to see that breakdown. And I think it's definitely true. Because he actually interviewed Tom and he was like trying to get it out of him and he wouldn't say it. But he finally got him to say it, like that those things like did motivate him and drive him throughout his career. So I really liked that. And he shared about a couple other athletes too. He was beginning to share about Tiger Woods and there was someone else, but now I'm forgetting it. Either way, that was really cool. And I'm really enjoying that book so far.
Sounds great.
And yeah, last thing briefly, that's kind of unrelated, but was very inspiring to see for me is that number one, Tiger Woods is playing again after multiple surgeries on his back and stuff and ankles too. So he's playing again and he's playing with his son. And I thought that was so cool.
And knees.
Uh,
He had an ACL too.
yeah, I mean, he's had everything, but he's playing again. And he's playing in like these, whatever, I don't know what they're called, but it's like father-son tournaments or whatever.
Yeah.
And really cool to see. His son's obviously an amazing golf player. But I just saw like this highlight video that I thought was really cool when it was showing like frame by frame and how they look exactly the same swing, same celebration, same taking their hat off, same like everything's the same. So it's really funny to see. But it's cool to see him still playing, and then it's cool that I didn't even know his son was playing golf, but it's cool to see that like he'll continue on carry the torch. So that was cool to see. All right. Well, next we like to jump into business check-in. So we usually go over some KPIs from the past week, victories, any challenges. We were doing an SMS update kind of weekly for a while, but I don't have any really updates on my end. But if you want to share on that or any other marketing updates that you've encountered recently, go for it.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I will. Thanks for the reminder. I will check in about SMS because that's something that's still a work in progress. If you listen to the podcast or if you do your own SMS marketing, you know there's a lot of challenges this year with SMS marketing and changes in how we can communicate with sellers and what we can say and all this stuff. And if you've been following me at all, you know I had probably 3 months of downtime with the launch control platform, which was really painful and put a crimp in our pipeline. The
Yeah.
silver lining was it forced us to really dial in our follow-ups with the leads we had, which is great. So currently, our SMS, our launch control is back. We're able to talk to sellers much more similarly to the way we used to before everything changed and the carriers cracked down. But our response rate has not come back up on our templates that we have currently working. I think we're at about 11 to 12%. I think it's 11% response rate on initial messages to sellers. And we were at somewhere between 17 and 20, I think, prior to all this stuff happening. So
Mhm.
what it basically means is we have to send twice as many text messages to get the same number of leads right now. That's kind of our current reality with SMS. So we
Yeah.
are doing more. We're doubling down on our commitment to direct mail. And I think I'm going to do a TikTok or a YouTube video on just direct mail in the different formats that we've used. But we're using one right now called Yellow Letter Shop, and it's actually like it's a letter that looks like one of these letter on one of these yellow pads, and it looks like handwriting, and the outside of the letter, looks like a normal stamp. And so we're still in the beta phase on that. We've done 2 campaigns, but we're getting pretty good response. And it's crazy because we're closing a lot of deals still, the last part of this year from direct mail campaigns we sent out in the early part of the year. So direct mail definitely works. It's just the time
Mhm.
frame, the cash conversion rate or the time frame is longer. But
Yeah.
it definitely the quality of our leads, and actually one of my team members broke down our revenue from the year and the sources and then the average per deal, and our per closed deal average revenue for direct mail is higher than our per closed deal average revenue from SMS, interestingly.
Yeah.
So I'm going to look more into that. But yeah, that's my SMS update, and then I can jump into checking in about business. I realized that, Jasper, I really like it when you check in about your deals and how, the backstory behind it. And I think if people are listening who are still trying to figure out how to do a wholesale business or scale a wholesale business, just talking about some of these deals might be helpful. As always, like if you're listening and you want to know more about something in specific, let us know. But I broke down the one deal. We closed one. I'll slow down here a little bit. We closed one deal this week, so I did a little bit more of a detailed breakdown on that. So as far as victories, we got an offer yesterday on a property we have in it's a mobile home property that Jasper I've talked to you about. We've talked about on this podcast, but it's
Mhm.
2 mobile homes on a lot and then 2 vacant lots. And we got an offer yesterday that we will counter, but it's going to be in the ballpark of a $40,000 profit on that. So that will be probably my biggest check to date once we close that. So
Awesome.
that's exciting.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. We closed a 30K this past year. So that's been our biggest check, if you're talking about a single check to date. Uh, so then another victory is we closed this property in Sampson County, North Carolina. And it was one that we got from a land marketing campaign. And this is the one I'll break down. It was from a land marketing campaign. It's out of state owner. And we bought this property as it has a rundown house on it, and we bought it as land only because the seller told us that it was a tear down house. And then when we got some photos of the house, just to double check, it looked like it might be something that somebody could fix up. So then we marketed it as a fixer-upper house, and we ended up selling this deal for $20K, and we bought it for $3K. So we also
Nice.
sold it on owner financing, which means that that $17K profit will actually be closer to $20K profit because of the interest. We are charging 10% interest on that compound interest. So that's a huge victory to close that one this week. And then I'll just break it down a little bit. So it came from an SMS campaign. It was a land campaign for out-of-state owners. And we launched that campaign in April of 2023. The lead came in, later that month. 427 is what, April 27th. We didn't contract this deal until November 3rd. So that means, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. It's like six months at least between
Yeah.
the lead and the contract. And then once we got the contract, that was November 3rd. We got a 90-day contract on it, which is what we normally do on land. We sold it on December 1st, so a little less than 30 days from contract to sold. And then we closed it on December 28th, this past week. So,
Mhm.
from the time of the lead until the time of closing was 8 months. So that's just interesting to notice. Uh,
Yeah.
and a couple other points on this one. One of the wins on this is that once we realized that it was a house that could probably be fixed up and we had solid interest in it, we decided to buy this just to make sure we had control of it, because it's a rare thing, but it does happen in our business that buyers will try and go direct to seller and cut us out of the deal. So we're like, no, we're going to make sure we are in control of this deal, and it's only $3,000. So we bought it. We also bought the adjacent lots from the same seller, which we're under contract on for $13K for just a vacant lot. So, that's going to end up being, like a 30, investing 6,000 to make like 30 something, 33, 35.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's great.
that's a win on that. So the win was, rolling the dice on that. And then it was cool. It was a win-win with buyer because she has a brother and a father who are carpenters, and she was totally stoked to get this beat up house,
Hmm.
for $20K and be able to fix it up. I think she's going to live there. I don't think they're doing it as an investment. Another win with this deal was the seller was super cooperative and friendly and easy to work with, which is always a big victory. And the buyer was great too. And then one little hiccup we had was that we bought this with an attorney, Jasper, that you and I have worked with a bunch the last year. And when we went to sell it to the buyer with a second attorney, who he found an issue with the title that the first attorney who did the purchase failed to find for us. So it was really scary for a little bit there, because we were like, oh, we just thought we were going to make 20K on this thing, and now we might be stuck with a property with a title issue. So uh,
Yeah.
luckily, the first lawyer did step up and get in there and help to fix it along with the closing attorney. So we were able to close it. So that's a challenge and a victory both. But so that's just kind of more of a deal breakdown. If you're listening and you like more breakdowns with detail like this, let us know, because we've closed a lot of deals and we can break these down, and if it's helpful or if there's stuff you want to know. But yeah, so that was a victory. As far as other KPIs, we had one contract this week is a land parcel. It came from SMS. We didn't sell any this week, but we did sell 6 this month overall. So that's nice. On a month that can be slow, we sold 6. And then we got that offer in yesterday. We could lock that down, but we're going to counter offer that. And probably we won't end up locking it down until next week. And then we closed the one, as I mentioned. So what else do we have here for business check-in? Oh, I did a little bit of a breakdown for the year. I started doing the end of the year breakdown. So I just wanted to share some numbers. This is mostly just closed deals, but I was doing a breakdown of that. We closed 46 deals this year. And then, 48 if you want to count. Like, sometimes we go back and forth with my team when we're selling 2 lots from one seller to one buyer. Is that 2 closed or is it 1? I see it as 1, but we closed
Yeah.
we closed 48 properties, but it's 46 closings. Uh,
That's awesome.
yeah, that's pretty awesome, because that made me remember, Jasper, that last year you had a goal to close 50 deals and you hit it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have a number of deals goal this year. I just had a revenue goal, but it was interesting to see that we almost hit 50 closed.
Yeah.
46
That's
is
awesome.
nice because we closed 23 in 2022, so we doubled the number of deals that we closed
Nice.
here. And then that breaks down into we did two. Jasper mentioned at the top that we've specialized in land. We did 44 of those were vacant land, and two of them were properties with a house on them.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's shifting because we've got stuff in escrow now with houses on it, but it's gonna be a different ratio next year. And then out of those deals, 5 were owner finance deals out of 46. 37 of those were assignments, and 2 of them were cash, just because we bought and then resold the property. Uh,
Hmm.
and then we closed deals in 17 counties in North Carolina. So we worked just in North Carolina, but 46 deals closed in 17 counties. Most of those were the land deals were under 5 acres. Most were under two. We did one large acreage. We did one 30-acre parcel, but the rest were, somewhere between a half and 5 acres, and most of them under 2 acres, just building lots. And then just
Uh-huh.
a side note on that is that, we closed 46, but we canceled 14. So that means, that's for various reasons. We've talked about this on the podcast, but if you're new, just like keep putting deals in escrow because they don't all close, right? So
Yeah.
when that comes out to about 70% of the deals that we contracted and sold to a buyer for assignment or sold for owner financing, actually 70% of those actually closed. So
Yeah.
that's just part of the game. And yeah, guess I had a couple of challenges here. We have the ongoing title issues, liens, judgments, estate files. I guess I'll mention this. I think I texted you about this, Jasper, but we were slated to close at the beginning of this month 7 deals this last week of December, which was awesome. And it was whatever it was, 60 plus in revenue, which would have been a great way to close the month out. We ended up closing 1 out of 7 deals, and I think 3 of those got canceled, and then 3 of them were delayed. One of the 3 that got canceled is because the seller changed their mind, and so we're filing a specific performance suit on that, which Jasper and I have talked about. I think in the last podcast we talked about specific performance, number 19. But yeah, so it's just like crazy how that can happen sometimes. Like you're sitting pretty with 7 deals in escrow to close, and then one ends up closing. Like I said, a few of them will close in the next few weeks, and then uh, one of those, the specific performance, hopefully we can do something with that and close it sometime later this year, in 2024. So,
Yeah.
what we've decided in our business, because of all the issues we've had, is we're just going to start. We're going to find out which attorney will do preliminary title searches. We're just going to pay for a preliminary title search on all these deals. Once it goes through our vetting process and we feel like it's a good deal, after we get it under contract, we have a post-contract review. We're going to send it to an attorney and ask for a preliminary title search, because we've just had way too many issues where we get into escrow and then we're like the week of closing and something comes up because the lawyer has waited until the week of closing to pull the title, and meanwhile the buyer thinks they're closing, the seller thinks they're closing, and it's just not a good deal for anybody involved. So
No.
I figure that with the money we've lost with having to pay judgments in order to close, or pay liens in order to close, or discount our assignment fees, or just, lose the deal altogether and then lose credibility with buyers or sellers, it's just not worth it. And it's totally worth it to spend a couple $100 for a title search on all these deals. So
Yeah.
we're gonna test that as a new policy going into 2024, where everything, just once it gets through our in-house review, it gets a preliminary title, and then we market it. And then a funny story, just Jasper, because you know who this person is, but I had one of our dispo team sent out an email, and he copied me on it, and he was like, "Hey, such and such seller, we got a new property in this area. We know you've been interested in the area in the past. Blah blah blah. Here's the details. Let us know if you're interested." And I responded. I meant to respond to him, and I replied to all, and I said, "We are not. We don't want to be sending any deals to this buyer. They are difficult, and they burned us on a deal." And I accidentally replied to all. So I replied to the buyer as well.
Oh
And
no.
this was the buyer when I was staying at your house in Phoenix that I had that big drama with, and they were yelling at me and like threatening me and all this stuff. And we ended up going with them because they threatened us, and then they burned us on the deal, and it was a big mess, and it lasted
Yeah.
months and months and months. So anyway, I accidentally said we're not dealing with this buyer, and they're difficult, and they burned us on a deal. So and then I was like trying to figure out how to unsend the email, but I couldn't figure it out. So I was like, okay, whatever. And my partner was like, well, that person needs to hear that. They were a jerk. So I didn't
Yeah.
see anything really really nasty, but just kind of a funny story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other challenge is the cancellations that I just mentioned. We had 14 canceled deals this year that were in escrow, and we had 2 or 3 of them canceled this past week or two. So
Yeah.
that's rough, but it's part of the business. And like I said, we're taking action to try and improve that area. So, but yeah, I think that's all I've got for business check-in. Hopefully that helps anybody or gives people insight into how this stuff works.
Yeah, that was a great check-in. Thank you for sharing your numbers too. Congratulations on all those deals. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great to double the amount of deals that we did year over year. That definitely shows growth. Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. Oh, and yeah, I think that's a great idea on the preliminary title shirts. I have noticed that certain attorneys can wait until the last second, like you said, which makes things very difficult if there is title issues.
Yeah.
And other attorneys might not wait that long, but either way, I think it's a great idea to just do that before you even start marketing the deal, because then you know
Yeah, and
right
a
away.
lot of those it won't cost anything because you end up closing the deal with the attorney that did the preliminary title search, so it's just part of the normal
Yeah,
closing. But even in the worst
exactly.
case scenario where they get back to you and say, "Oh no, this deal's got an issue that's going to make it so you can't close it," or whatever, then it's whatever $150 to $300 times what 10 or 15 over the year, maybe 20. It's still going to save us so much money and hassle, you know.
Yeah, and it saves you time, which is most important.
And
So
time, yeah, we spend so much money dealing with these buyers and sellers and going down the garden path and researching and getting how it is. There's just so much
yeah,
stuff, and if we just found out up front, then we can have that energy and time to do deals that are actually going to close.
yeah,
Which reminds me of another challenge I forgot to write down, but I'll just try and do a thumbnail of it because it made me think of you because we got a mobile home under contract. It looks like a really good deal. I think we got the contract for 39 with 11K in back taxes. We got it for 50. Estimated retail ARV is like 110, right? So there's meat on the bone there. Uh, and and there's a tenant in the mobile home, and they are the cousin of the seller, and they have no lease, and they don't pay any rent, and they don't have any plans of moving apparently. So
nice.
so, so that's I laugh, but it's not a fun one. So
Yeah,
and then most recently the tenant told our seller to stop texting her because she was texting her like about getting in to like do inspections and like can we get the electric meter number and the water meter number and stuff like that, and she's like stop texting me.
yeah,
So anyway, probably this one will be to be continued for the future episodes, but just an interesting
yeah,
challenge. Like, can we get in touch with this person, do cash for keys, help her move, get her to commit to a timeline? But I guess what made me think of that was that the first thing we're doing is we're doing a preliminary title to make sure that the title is okay before we start chasing our tail with this, maybe not chasing our tail, but jumping through hoops with this seller. Before we start doing that whole process, let's make sure that the title's good and this guy can actually sell it, right? And then once we determine that, then we'll figure out the next steps. But that's our approach on this one. So I'm done. We can talk more about that one next week. See what's developed.
sounds good. Well, yeah, just one quick thing for you and anyone listening for email mishaps, because I've had plenty of those too. You can go in your Gmail, and this is something I did on all my Gmails, but you can go in there into settings, and let me see if I can find the exact setting so I can share it. But
I did that. I
you go in
set
there,
it up, and then I couldn't find it after I sent this one. I couldn't find the button at the bottom of the page to unsend.
yeah. So if you just go into settings, it's called undo send,
Yeah,
and you can select your cancellation period. So I have 30 seconds on all mine
yeah.
because I think the standard is like 5 seconds, which is way too short if
No,
you want
yeah,
to make a mistake. But yeah, for anyone listening, I would recommend 30 seconds just in case you ever make a. I mean, it could be a typo or it could be like a major mistake or something. But
like I did. Yeah, I
just in
set that up
case.
too, and I set 30 seconds. I was on my phone, and I couldn't find the button.
Oh yeah, I don't know if
On
it
your
works on the
computer,
phone
it's
as
like in the
well.
bottom left corner. You can undo send. But
Yeah,
when I was on my phone, I was like, where is it? Oh shit, I can't find it. And then
yeah. I don't know if it works on the phone as well. That's a good point, but
yeah,
I know it does work on the
by
computer.
the time I got to the computer, it was too late anyway. So I was like, okay.
Yeah, that was a
But
funny one.
it's a good tip. Yeah, you can go into your settings in Gmail, set it, undo send, and set it for the longest time interval to give yourself time if you do make a mistake and you want to correct it. You can undo send.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
absolutely.
a nice feature. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we can switch over.
Yeah. Let's hear about what's going on in your business.
Yeah, I'll start with KPIs for this week. So this week we got 191 leads, which was despite having 4 working days. We took Christmas off, obviously. So I'm very pleased with that because that's still trending upwards every week since I hired cold callers. The leads have just been increasing in total. And so I think that's in large part because of the callers. So I'm very very pleased with that. I see the leads continue to go up. And I think actually December, let me just look at my numbers. Yeah, December was actually our best month out of the year in terms of leads.
Wow.
So I'm excited. I'm excited to look at that because, as we know, results are usually lagging anywhere from 60 to 120 days. 2 to 4 months. And so for me, when having our biggest lead month in December, seems like that'll set us up for a pretty good first quarter, hopefully. So I'm hoping for that. And also, since launch control gave us issues in October, that was one of our lower leads month. November was also very good, and December. So hopefully, we're going to have a strong fourth quarter next year. But yeah, so I'll stick to KPIs. So 191 leads this week, 47 offers, and we got. I don't know if I should count it as a contract. I got a price reduction slash new contract this week. So that was the only contract. We didn't get another contract besides that. And then we sold one deal and closed one deal this week. So those are the KPIs. I can share briefly on the deal that we did close because that was a pretty big victory for me just in terms of the timeline on this deal. So this deal came from a campaign that we launched all the way back in March of 2022. So
Wow.
over a year and a half on this deal. And we launched this campaign as an SMS campaign, like I said, in March of 2022. And then we got this seller lead. Let's see when we got this lead. We got this lead in August of 22. So just from there, from March to August, took us about 3 months, or what's that? April, May, June, July. Oh, sorry, it's like 5 months since we launched the campaign to when we first got this guy who came in our CRM. So he came in August of 22. And then we followed up quite a bit. And he actually, this is an interesting one because we sent him an offer like way back in 2022, pretty soon after talking to him. So in August of 20, and he wasn't quite ready yet for whatever reason. And so we were just following up, monthly. And then this summer, he reached back out to us via email, which is interesting because we don't get too many of those. So he actually came directly to my email because my DocuSign is linked to my email. And so he reached back out to us and kind of followed up with us, even though we've been, reaching out via text and call. But he followed up with us, said he was getting closer to being ready, and that they're actually moving out of state. And so they were pretty much needed to sell before the end of the year because they're moving to Georgia. And so I was like, awesome, we'd love to work with you. And it was kind of still on hold because he was waiting for confirmation for his wife's job. Basically, she was moving remote and they didn't want to live in Wilson, North Carolina, which is where this deal was. They wanted to move in Georgia anyways. And so they were just waiting to see if her position could be done remotely. And so anyways, long story short, it could. And again, he reached out to me via email, which is funny because he has all of our numbers and we've been texting and calling him and stuff, but I guess he preferred email or whatever. And so he reached out to me again once they got that confirmation, and we locked up the deal. And so that was September of this year, obviously. And so from getting the lead in August to September, it was over a year before we got a contract on this guy and a bunch of follow-ups. In my CRM, it says 29 follow-up attempts. I think that's a bit lower, and that's also not including emails. So quite a few touches on him, and it finally paid off. We got a contract in September, but then again, he needed a few months to close because they still hadn't bought the other house. They were under contract performing inspections and stuff on their other house in Georgia while being out of state. So that was taking them a bit longer. And so then about right around Thanksgiving, he gave me the green light. He was like, all right, we did our inspection, everything. We're moving forward. We're going to close on this house last week of December. And so up until this point, I had the contract since September, and I hadn't done anything in terms of marketing because I didn't want a buyer waiting 4 months. They might get mad or just change their mind or something. So I was like, cool. So he gave me the green light with like a good amount of time, about a month to sell the deal and get closed and everything. So we marketed it out, and I don't do deals in Wilson, North Carolina, really at all. I think this is like my second or third one ever. And so I didn't really know. I wasn't super confident on this one in terms of my pricing and stuff. But turns out it was a great deal, and I priced it a bit low. And I accepted an offer because it came in over asking. I accepted it. And then it's funny because after I accepted and signed and everything, I got a bunch of calls that just kept coming, and they were just people who really wanted this deal. So I probably left a little bit of meat on the bone. I probably could have sold it for 3 to 5 thousand more potentially. But with this one, I really just wanted a solid buyer because when a seller when it's owner occupied, I really don't want to mess around and mess with anybody that I don't know because they're moving out of state. Like they're really trusting us to make sure this happens. So I think I did miss out on a few thousand, but I wanted to work with a buyer that I know and trust and stuff. So I went with him, and long on time despite a few issues because this is the week after Christmas. The buyer was traveling. The lender was pretty much closed until literally the day of closing. Like the lender that was lending on the deal was not able to respond because their office was closed until we closed on the 28th. And so a lot of companies were closed like Christmas, the day after, and the next day, including the counties for recording. We couldn't even close if we wanted because all the counties were closed. So anyways, long story short, we did close it on the 28th, and kudos to the buyer, for coming through because they were traveling and everything, but they still made time to sign, before they went out of town with Steve. Even though we couldn't record, they signed earlier with the attorney, and then they went out of town and everything, and then we coordinated getting the keys from these guys and all kinds of stuff because they left the keys at the office in Raleigh, but then the property's in Wilson, and the guy's contractor's in Wilson and all this stuff. So I had to run the keys out to him and do a bunch of fun stuff around that. But long story short, we got it closed, and I'm just super proud of my team for all the follow-ups and stuff because this is one of our longer deals. It's about 18 months, I think, from August to it's about a year and a half from when the lead came in to when we actually closed the deal. And like I said, it's shout out to my team for staying top of mind with this guy. And I'm sure like in 18 months he probably had millions of phone calls coming in.
Oh yeah.
And he decided. So shout out to him as well for working with us because he seemed like a man of his word. He gave us his word like 6 months ago, and he continued to like give us updates on his process and stuff. So all in all, I was really excited with how the deal panned out because I think a lot of things could have went wrong in between there, but they didn't. It was a smooth deal.
And this is their
So
primary residence that they sold wholesale?
What's that?
It was their primary residence and they sold it wholesale.
Yeah.
Why did they choose to go wholesale instead of retail?
I don't know. I mean, the property obviously needed work, but it wasn't terrible. But like 10% of our deals are vacant or less. Like they're very rarely vacant. And it's probably like the other half are probably split between owner occupied and tenant occupied. So we get a lot of owner occupied deals, but I always feel more pressure around those deals because obviously they're trusting you with the sale of their home, and they're typically buying another house either with the proceeds or they've already bought it and they're trying to move out. So on those deals, sometimes I get more stressed because I don't want them to be left stranded or something if we don't close. But with this one, especially because they're moving out of state, I felt even more pressure. So I'm really happy we were able to get it done. But yeah, that's pretty much the story of that one. I just wanted to share that.
Cool. And it was a nice
yeah, they're definitely. What's that?
It was a nice profit deal too.
Yeah, it was a good profit deal. It was a good way to end the year because in December we only closed technically 3 deals. I got it at EMD, but that's not a deal. So we only closed 3 deals, but it was nice to close this one, and we had another good profit deal the week or 2 weeks before. So yeah, that's that. I guess that's it for my KPIs and deal check-in and stuff. In terms of victories, I just shared a bunch of victories on that deal. I had another victory that I shared with you um, offline. I think that was, don't know if that was this past week or the week before, but either way, I had a deal where a buyer canceled on me and the attorney just refunded me my EMD with no questions
Yeah, that's
asked.
great.
And that was awesome.
Yeah.
That was like, I think that was the first time that's ever happened to me, like ever.
Yeah.
Dealing with a bunch of different attorneys. And it's interesting because North Carolina is not a state where you even need to do that. There are certain states, I have friends in certain states where it's actually a law that you can't release EMD without signature from both parties. North Carolina, it's actually not a law. Just do that for no reason.
Yeah.
And so I was just really grateful to have that experience this time. And for anyone who is listening, who's newer to wholesaling, I would definitely recommend, even though, like I mentioned, it's not technically a law, it seems like maybe it used to be, or a bunch of attorneys are just, kind of old school or whatever in your assignment that's pretty strong and pretty black and white that says, like in mine, I just literally added a thing that says, by signing this agreement, the assignee hereby waives all rights to their deposit. So it's pretty black and white. Like by signing and accepting this agreement, you don't have any rights to your deposit once it's sent in. So I have other language as well, but I feel like that's the main line that if that was to go to court and a judge read that, they're like, well, you clearly read this, you clearly signed, you have no rights to your deposit anymore, So, but even so, you'll still have issues. So I would recommend doing that for anyone newer who might be listening. But also, before you even go into business with an attorney, I would recommend that up front. Just asking them like, hey, what's your policy on EMD? Like, this is my assignment agreement. This is what it says. If, for example, we had a buyer back out, something I didn't do, and it would save you a lot of headache.
It's been a pain for both of us because I've had EMDs that went back to the buyer that shouldn't have, and I've had people saying to me, "Well, you got to get the buyer to sign." Actually, the person I mentioned earlier that I sent the wrong email to, you know, they just welched on a deal on us, and the lawyer would not give us a security deposit. They would just not give it to us, and it was like this. We gave them an extension. They clearly are in violation, breach of contract, and they just wouldn't give it to us without the buyer signing. The buyer's never going to sign it. It's like, I'm not signing that. That means I'm giving away the money. So it's a little bit of a breach of integrity, I think, on the attorney's part, because, probably if I went back and followed up, they probably end up giving that back to the buyer, which is really against the law.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, but I think it could be a good talking point for newer people or more experienced, because it's still something we deal with. But a couple of things you could do to mitigate that, like I already said. But also, I think I lost my train of thought. But I was going to say something else about the EMD thing. Oh, I was going to say, I think that's also a reason, especially when you're newer, buyers are going to try to bully you into using their attorney, and this is a main reason to not do that, because like you just shared, if it's with their attorney, you can wave goodbye to that deposit. You're never getting that if they back out, But if it's with your attorney, you at least have some more leverage. Hopefully your attorney is someone like we talked about who has integrity and who will just refund it because that's what the contract states. But if you're working with your buyer-specific closing attorney, you're not getting that money back, and we've dealt with that plenty of times. So I think those are probably 3 things that I could recommend to anyone listening, myself included. But number 1, vet your attorney is specifically regarding EMD, because that can add up. Let's say, hopefully all of your deals are going to close, but that's not true. At least 10% are probably going to fall out because of buyer or seller. But let's say it's because of the buyer, and let's say you have 5 deals a year that your buyer backs out on you on. Let's say the EMD on those is $3,000. That's $15,000. That's a deal that you just would get if your attorney did the right thing. But if you don't, then you lose $15,000. So that can make a big difference. And so, I would recommend those 3 things I mentioned for anyone listening, but myself included. But that was kind of a tangent there. It started out as a victory, but it also can be a challenge.
It's definitely a good one. Yeah, good one to talk about, because Yeah, we both lost money on this, and it really is. You probably could sue some of these attorneys for not paying the EMD when the contract says they're supposed to pay it to you, but they're just counting on you're not going to do that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, there was that, and I don't know. I think I had something else I wanted to share with you, but I'm not sure right now. So I might just have to close it out there. Yeah, I think that's it. So let's close it out with some quotes. I'll pull up the Atomic Habits for anyone listening. If you want a good book to read, it's called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And if you want a fun email to subscribe to, I'm sure you can just search up atomichabits.com or something and you'll find it. But he sends out a good email every week. So I'm pulling this from his email. So let me read his 3 ideas from this email. So number 1, when you choose your friends today, you are choosing your habits tomorrow. That's a good one.
Good one, yeah.
That's like we always talk about, surrounding yourself with the right people. And, everyone's heard the quote that you become the sum of the 5 people you spend most time with. So that's a good one. Good reminder. Number 2, it's easier to optimize a modest start than to begin with a perfect start. Starting is the hard part. So start small and get in the mix. You'll learn a lot and you'll realize you don't need to have it all figured out to begin. That's a very good one, especially for anyone who might be looking to get into wholesaling or any other business. You don't need to wait for the perfect time. You can just start and figure it out on the way. And number 3, don't spend too much time around someone whose primary way of engaging with life is as a martyr. When suffering becomes your identity, you only see the hard parts of life. That's a great quote too. So awesome. And then he leaves you with one question on his emails typically. So for this week, it was, what are my favorite hours of the day and what adjustments can I make to ensure they're under my control? So that's a good one.
Yeah. For me, it's
That's
early
a good
morning.
thinking point. Yeah, same here.
5 a.m. to 11 a.m. is probably my favorite part of the day.
Yeah, same here. And it's nice because those hours are usually in your control because most people aren't awake until at least like 9 o'clock. So. But yeah, awesome. So that's it for today's episode. Anybody, if you have any comments or questions or anything, feel free to leave them below. And we'll make sure to review those before next episode. And we'll see you then. Thanks for listening and watching.
Thanks.